never thought an antique shop would lead to such a chilling experience. It all started when we moved to a small, quiet town. We needed furniture for our new home, and while browsing through dusty relics, we found an ornate mirror. It was beautiful, yet something about it felt unsettling. We decided to buy it anyway, thinking it would be a unique addition to our living room. Once the mirror was in our home, strange things began to happen. Reflections seemed off, like they lagged behind reality. Shadows flickered across its surface, and I could swear I heard faint whispers when I was alone. Our daughter was the first to notice. She claimed she saw a woman in the mirror, a woman who wasn't there when she turned around. Her description was vivid, a lady in a flowing dress with haunting eyes. At first, we dismissed it as a child's imagination, but soon we experienced the odd occurrences ourselves. Items would move without explanation. Cold drafts swept through the room, and soft sobbing echoed at night. The turning point came one night when our daughter vanished. We found her standing before the mirror, her eyes wide, whispering, "She wants me to come with her." Panic set in. I knew we had to act fast. We reached out to local historians and uncovered the mirror's dark history. It belonged to a woman rumored to be a witch, trapped within by a vengeful town. Her spirit was restless, seeking another soul. Desperate, we sought help from an elderly man, known for his knowledge of the supernatural. Together, we performed a ritual to release the spirit and break its hold. During the ritual, the mirror cracked violently, releasing a cold, mournful wind. The room filled with a wail that made our skin crawl, and the ghostly figure slowly dissolved, finally at peace. The mirror shattered completely, leaving behind only an empty frame. My story begins on a cool autumn evening when a group of us decided to take a shortcut through an old graveyard on our way home from a late-night study session. The cemetery was a relic from a bygone era, nestled on the outskirts of town, mostly forgotten and overgrown. We had always heard stories about it being haunted, but we were skeptical and curious. The sun had already dipped below the horizon, and the moon cast a pale light over the gravestones. As we stepped into the cemetery, the air grew colder, and a heavy silence fell over us. The path was narrow and winding, with tall, twisted trees casting eerie shadows. The gravestones, some crumbling and others barely readable, stood as silent sentinels of the past. At first we walked in silence, each of us lost in our thoughts. But as we ventured deeper into the graveyard, an unsettling feeling began to creep over me. It was as if we were being watched. I glanced at my friends, and I could see the same unease reflected in their faces. "I don't like this," whispered one of them. "It feels wrong." We tried to laugh it off, but the atmosphere grew more oppressive with each step. The shadows seemed to move, and the silence was occasionally broken by the rustling of leaves or the distant hoot of an owl. We quickened our pace, eager to reach the other side and leave the graveyard behind. Just as we thought we were nearing the exit, we came across a section of the cemetery that seemed even older and more neglected. The gravestones here were covered in moss, and some had fallen over. In the center of this forgotten area stood a large, weathered tombstone, half hidden by overgrown vines. Curiosity got the better of us, and we approached the tombstone. As we drew closer, I felt a chill run down my spine. The inscription was barely visible, but it read, "Here lies the body of Emily Rose, taken too soon." Beneath the name, a date from the 1800s was etched into the stone. "Let's go," I said, my voice trembling. But before we could turn away, a low, mournful wail echoed through the graveyard. It was a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, sending a wave of terror through us. We froze, our hearts pounding in our chests. The wail grew louder, more anguished, and then As suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The silence that followed was even more unnerving. "Run!" someone shouted, and we bolted. We raced through the graveyard, stumbling over roots and dodging gravestones. The sense of being watched grew stronger, and I could almost feel eyes boring into my back. Finally, we burst out of the cemetery and onto the road. We didn't stop running until we reached the safety of our homes. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had disturbed something that was meant to be left alone. In the days that followed, strange things started happening. It began with small, almost imperceptible occurrences. At first, we tried to brush them off as coincidences, but they soon became too frequent and unnerving to ignore. I would hear whispers when no one else was around, soft and indistinct, but clearly voices. At night, I would wake up to find my room freezing cold, despite the windows being shut and the heater on. Shadows seemed to move on their own, flitting across the walls and ceiling. My friends reported similar experiences. One of them saw a figure standing at the foot of his bed in the middle of the night, a shadowy silhouette that vanished when he turned on the light. Another found her possessions moved or missing, only to reappear in odd places later. We were all terrified, but none of us wanted to admit it. We tried to go about our daily lives, but the fear was always there, lurking just beneath the surface. We began avoiding the graveyard entirely, taking longer routes to get where we needed to go. One evening, we decided to meet up and discuss what was happening. We gathered at a friend's house, sharing our experiences and trying to make sense of it all. It was clear that whatever we had encountered in the graveyard was now following us. "We need to find out more about that tombstone," one of us suggested. "Maybe if we understand what we're dealing with, we can figure out how to stop it." Reluctantly, we agreed. The next day, we went to the town library and started researching the history of the cemetery and the people buried there. It didn't take long to find information on Emily Rose. Emily Rose had been a young woman who died under mysterious circumstances in the late 1800s. There were rumors that she had been accused of witchcraft and that her death was not natural. Some believed that she had been wronged and that her spirit was restless, seeking justice or revenge. The story began on a chilly autumn day when my sister and I stumbled upon an old stall at an antique market. Amidst the dusty junk, a porcelain doll caught our eye. It had a delicate face with curly black hair and wore a faded blue silk dress. Despite its wear and tear, there was something eerie and captivating about it. My sister instantly fell in love with the doll and declared it the perfect addition to our collection. Despite my hesitation, we bought it and took it home. From the moment the doll entered our house, strange things began to happen. Objects shifted places, lights flickered, and unexplained cold drafts swept through the rooms. We tried to ignore these incidents, but an increasing sense of unease settled over our home. The doll was given a name and treated as a cherished companion. The strange occurrences continued, and soon the feeling of fear became a constant companion. I began hearing faint whispers at night, which would stop when I went to check the room. It was clear that something was amiss. One night while I was lying in bed, I heard a soft, unsettling sound. I thought it was my sister talking to the doll, but she was peacefully asleep, clutching the doll. The whispers grew louder, filled with anger and bitterness. The next morning, I tried discussing the whispers with my sister, but she dismissed them as mere imagination. As days turned into weeks, the atmosphere in our home grew heavier. The strange occurrences persisted. Doors slammed shut, objects flew off shelves, and strange symbols appeared on the walls. My sister's behavior began to change as well. She became withdrawn and irritable, speaking to the doll in hushed tones. To understand what was happening, I started researching haunted objects. I found numerous stories about cursed dolls, causing chaos in people's lives. One particular story caught my attention and seemed to mirror our experience eerily. The doll had a dark history, and its previous owners had suffered similar disturbances. Determined to find answers, I visited the market vendor who sold us the doll. The vendor, an elderly woman, appeared deeply disturbed when I mentioned the doll. Reluctantly, she revealed that the doll had once belonged to a little girl who had died under mysterious circumstances. The family had suffered misfortune after acquiring the doll and had sold it in desperation. With this chilling information, I returned home, anxious and troubled. I tried to warn my sister, but she was too attached to the doll to listen. The doll's malevolent influence over our home intensified, and the oppressive feeling grew stronger. The strange events continued to escalate. My sister became increasingly obsessed with the doll. She spent hours alone with it, speaking in an odd, disconnected tone. The house grew colder, and the sense of dread was a constant companion. One night I heard unsettling laughter coming from my sister's room. The laughter was unnatural, sending shivers down my spine. I listened at the door and heard my sister talking to the doll in a disjointed manner. The conversation seemed one-sided, with the doll apparently responding with malicious intent. Terrified, I tried to express my fears to my sister, but she brushed them off. The doll's effect on her behavior grew stronger, and I felt the darkness intensifying. Determined to find a solution, I consulted an expert on the supernatural. The expert explained that the doll might be possessed by a malevolent spirit and advised me to find a way to safely remove it. He provided some guidance on how to handle such situations. Following the expert's advice, I gathered everything needed to dispose of the doll safely. I decided that the best way was to burn it in an open space to avoid contaminating the house. That night, I prepared a site away from the house and brought the necessary materials to dispose of the doll. The atmosphere was tense as the doll's presence continued to evoke a sense of dread. As I began to burn it, the flames rose unusually high and sparks flew in all directions. The whispers emerged from the fire, and I felt as though a dark force was resisting the burning. The burning continued until the doll was reduced to ashes and the eerie light faded. Once finished, I made sure the doll was completely gone and began to feel relief, though anxiety still lingered. After removing the doll, we noticed that the atmosphere in the house became less tense and the strange occurrences dwindled. However, the sense of dread did not completely vanish, and I still heard whispers occasionally. I decided to confront the issue directly. I undertook a thorough cleaning of the house, rearranged the furniture, and removed any trace that could be associated with the doll. The unsettling sounds continued to appear sporadically, but there was noticeable improvement. The whispers became less frequent, and the strange events gradually ceased. I felt a sense of relief, though I remained vigilant. The ordeal made me more aware of safety and precautions when dealing with old or mysterious items. I became more cautious about bringing unexplained objects into my home. Several months passed, and life seemed to return to normal. However, I still felt a nagging sense of unease from time to time. The past events lingered in my mind. One day, while searching through old items in the attic, I came across the box that once held the doll. The darkness of the attic triggered memories, and I decided to open the box to check its contents. When I opened the box, I felt an uneasy sensation. Although the doll had been gone for some time, it still stirred uncomfortable feelings. I checked the attic thoroughly to ensure that no traces of the doll remained. The attic was filled with dust and old items, but I found no sign of the doll. I felt a bit reassured, but the fear of revisiting the nightmare remained.